Or what my apologies, what the long goodbye is.
No, it would be interesting to be able to talk with Raymond Chandler about it. But my feeling about it, and especially after talking with you for some time in preparation for our Zoom meeting tonight, is that the long goodbye is life. Life in the world is the long goodbye. We're conceived, born, and live, and there's so much crime and corruption and deviations in relation to our dreams and our ideals, and that's the long goodbye. I would love to, and I thought of it, but I didn't accomplish it, have the lyrics, Johnny Mercer's lyrics of the song. The great Johnny Mercer, who wrote Accentuate the Positive, Eliminate the Negative, and Don't Mess with Mr. In Between, as well as Chattanooga Choo Choo. And then the great John Williams, who's just re-recorded his theme for The Long Goodbye, and except for the very Hooray for Hollywood, the beginning and the end music, it's all a version of the same music. That's life.
I love the fact that song plays throughout and that it's hummed and that it's the doorbell chime. I mean, the fact that song, The Long Goodbye, is so deeply woven into this film.
Robert Altman, he's the one who knitted it. He's the one who conceived it and did it. I recall when Robert Altman, was asked to look at it because another director, perhaps an Academy Award director, I don't know if Peter Bogdanovich ever won an Academy Award, but I'm sure he deserved it. But he couldn't see me in this project, and David Bicker, who was running United Artists, sent it to Robert Altman. And Altman called to me where he was finishing the picture he did before this, which was called Images with Susanna York. And Altman called me. This is the extent of what he said. He said, "What do you think?" And I said to Robert Altman, this is about The Long Goodbye. I said, "I've always wanted to play this guy." And Robert Altman said to me, "You are this guy." And that was the beginning of the picture. And he gave me more room and more creative stimulation than I could ever have thought of before that anybody would or could give me. And through the picture, he lets me exhibit it. And I'll share all that I can with you in the time that you decide we have to communicate.
Well, I would love to hear, and I know everybody else would love to hear all of it. So I want to dive in with you about. You've said that most of your dialogue was improvised for this film. Going off of the fact that Altman, really let you run with this.
A great deal of it. I don't count. I don't. In terms of that, my father worked in the garment center, and he was a buyer, and he used to count stitches in garments, and he had a little microscope that he would look at it so he could count stitches in relation to the quality of the material.
I'm curious. That's such an interesting detail. What made you think of that, though?
Well, you mentioned improvisation.
Yes.
And in industry, and this is industry.
Absolutely.
And so we are live with your audience now.
Very much so.
A good portion of your audience, if not everyone, was aware and watched the Academy Awards last night.
Well, let me.
Why? Let me.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
In relation to what movies are, what film is, And there's purpose in it, not just commerce, not just business, but it's their stories. And Raymond Chandler was a great storyteller. He created the character in his books that we'll see tonight, with me having an unexpected, amazing privilege of playing the part. So as far as being prepared to be able to fulfill playing a role that great actors that I wouldn't compare myself to or with me, like Humphrey Bogart. I played it before, and people have played it since. But this version of Raymond Chandler, with the Robert Altman at the helm, is like an American jazz piece. And even though we're in the 70s, it's now. It is now, and we still are working at the possibility of a sequel to this, with me being a much older guy. I mean, I can't lie, but I still have this instrument, and I still care, and things matter to me as they matter to Philip Marlowe, who is the character.
Well, I have to say, I would love to see what that. I hope that sequel materializes. And
it's interesting. I would say it can't materialize in your imagination. I have recorded just about all of the works of Raymond Chandler, and that remains to be seen, but everyone in the audience, I would say, has an imagination. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here in relation to being able to identify and recognize ourselves in the piece, where you have great, wonderful artists like Sterling Hayden and Mark Rydell and Nina Van Pallant and Henry Gibson. Wow.
I'm so glad that you mentioned them, because that actually leads us to a question from Jim in our audience. He says, your scenes with Sterling Hayden, especially the drinking scene on the beach patio, stand out in the film. He says, I've read that Altman used Hayden's guilt over testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee to help him discover how to play his character Roger Wade. Were you aware, and did that play a part in your work with Hayden?
No, it didn't. We had originally cast a friend of Altman's to play Roger Wade.
It was Dan Blocker, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and you helped me out just like you just did, but I still, some of my mind comes back to me. And Dan Blocker was set to do it. And he died suddenly and unexpectedly. And the picture was almost shelved. And we were thinking about who could play the part. And I had thought John Huston, of course, and I'm sure there were others, but then Bob asked me to meet with Sterling Hayden. And I remember the first time I ever saw a Stanley Kubrick movie was The Killing, and Sterling Hayden was in it. And Sterling Hayden, and I knew nothing about the House of Un-American Activities. I'm not so political. I understand now what it is. And so I asked Bob if I could sit alone with Sterling Hayden. And actually we sat, Bob and Catherine, his wife at the time, had rented the house that is Roger Wade's house at the beach. And so I sat in a room just with Sterling, who had been in Ireland working with R.D. Laing, who was a very interesting writer. R.D. Laing, he wrote a book called Knots, Knots. And so I knew that Sterling knew, that I knew that Sterling knew that I understood him. And so we got along great.
I mean, the sequences with you two in this film are so electric. I mean, the performances, the characters are so totally different, but they work so beautifully and harmoniously. With I don't know, there's a little bit of electricity in those scenes together. They're very intense. You and Sterling. Yeah. Do you have any other memories of working with Sterling? I know Daniel and Jim and Mike in our audience were also wondering what else you remember of working with Sterling on this film. I mean, his performance is just wonderful in this.
Well, I mean, when I liberate him from the mental institution, and when I bring him home, and then, of course, the scene outside where he gets the bottle of aquavit, and when he talks about Terry Lennox, the character that Jim Bouton played, and this was, I believe, Jim Bouton's certainly first movie, and Marlowe says to Sterling, "What did you think of him? How did you feel about him?" And Sterling says he's the kind of a guy that if anyone asked me that, I would say I didn't know him. And then I say to him, "But what did you think of him?" And Sterling says, "I didn't know him." And when Sterling kills himself, I mean, and during a scene that Nina Van Pallant, who's playing his wife, is upstairs with me in their home, and you see him walk into the ocean, and then we run down, and I cared so about Sterling, and this was pre-Godfather. This is before he did The Godfather. And Sterling Hayden, he was quite something. And so I felt it's so important for me to really do everything I could to give the impression that I was trying to save his life. And so when I run into the ocean, I don't take my shoes off or my jacket, but I just took my tie off. And it was a tie that we chose for me to wear. I never changed clothes in it because it had American flags on it. And Sterling worked in Yugoslavia as part of resistance. I didn't know that he may have had a problem or had some history with the House on American activities. But I literally almost drowned because Sterling meant so much to me as an American actor. And again, I mean, if you know Dr. Strangelove, I mean, Sterling Hayden in Dr. Strangelove is astounding. And I would want for the Academy, who adds different categories, to have categories for performances that are not that well known or forgotten. Sterling Hayden, as the writer in this, is classic. It's his work is of a classic proportion.
I couldn't agree with you more. I love the fact that you mentioned his performance in The Killing, which is a longtime favorite of mine.